I am Daniel Likis, and welcome to Book 101 Review. Book 101 is all about the books that I read for the last 40 years. And today I have my special guest. He's the author of the novel Diamond Dragons, no other than Mr. Matthew Carudo.
Well, thanks for having me, Daniel. Appreciate it.
Welcome to Book 101, Mr. Matthew, and can you please introduce more about yourself?
Well, it depends on what you want me to say, but basically, Diamond Dragons is a series of books. It's also a series of screenplays, although that's a lot less part of the well-known information about it that I don't really reveal a whole ton about on the website. But ironically enough, um, in around like late 2017, early 2018, Diamond Dragons just started as a screenplay, and of course, it was my own work. So it's not like it's based on someone else's work, but that's how I began the whole process. I only really wanted to write screenplays. And part of the reason for that is my background in theater and performance and film and all this kind of stuff, and just, uh, productions that kind of revolved a little bit more around, seeing live action. And in addition to that, I also understood how complicated it would be to approach writing a book in juxtaposition to writing a screenplay. And for those who are not really familiar, which I wouldn't expect a lot of people would be familiar, is a screenplay is demonstrably different from a book, but in ways that most people aren't really going to understand. First of all, it's written in present tense. So everything occurs, you know, Daniel walked toward the table and picked up the gun and aimed it at whatever, Bob. Rather than, traditionally a lot of books are written in past tense, that all these events and situations they occurred in the past and you're reading about them, later on. Now, of course, these days you can see books written in many different tenses, but that's just one example. Another example with the screenplay, the difference with the screenplay is, of course, people will understand that the screenplay is really a skeletal structure and a primer for what a film eventually becomes. It in itself is not a film for many reasons that we can probably, understand. But a lot of people think, oh, if I write a screenplay, right, then it's just ready to become a movie. And I'll be like, not a bit of it, not a bit of it. There's a whole slew of other steps that would need to occur, and that would be independent even if you had a budget and a cast and a crew and a director and design concepts all over the pages and whatnot. So in any case, Diamond Dragons began as several screenplays. I wrote the first two, but then the pandemic struck. I had already kind of involved some voiceover actors to help me kind of just put together a small little video, which kind of introduced people to what the initial screenplay would be, like the first 15-20 minutes of it. And that's hard to explain, but people can look on my website and my video channel to sort of be like, whoa, he's made sort of a rough video representation of like the first 15-20 minutes of the book. And it's like, well, yeah, you can go and see it. Of course, again, to reiterate, it's a rough representation of what's going on, but you get to hear original music that I worked with a composer. I'm proud to say he's a great guy, fantastic composer. Um, and actually several other composers over the years. But in any case, there's original music, professional voiceover, some of which I did for the characters as well because of my background in theater and acting and VO work and whatnot. I also over the course of my years here as an artist, I designed over 9,000 sounds. So I'm also a sound designer, although I don't do it as much. It was very easy for me to do some sound work for these videos as well. So I know that's a lot to say, but hopefully that gives some people like um, a window into what's going on with Diamond Dragons. It is not simply text on a page and that's it. I mean, throughout the series of books so far, I've written four of them, written and published four of them. and it's over 600,000 words and 350 plus non AI illustrations. So there's no AI involved whatsoever. I don't use any kind of specialized software to cook up my books or whatnot. And all the illustrations are essentially handled by me in one way or another. And or I bring aboard like several artists to be like, hey, I want to hire you to draw like this dragon under this condition. Will you help me out? And I work with different folks that way. Sometimes it works out really well. Other times, oh, it's not going to work. But I love bringing aboard other people to contribute their wonderful artwork. You know, so I know that's a lot. Again, that's a lot to say, but there's
Yes.
there's a lot going on with it.
So, Mr. Matthew Carudo, thank you for sharing your talents to the world.
Wow, we get
Thank you
wow,
so
that was pretty
much.
cool.
So, what draws you to the world of Diamond Dragons?
So I guess there's a lot of factors that are involved with what kind of gave me the impetus to say, well, do I really want to approach this? And part of it is, again, my background in theater and performance and film and whatnot, and also just appreciating films over all these many decades. And so uh, there's a lot of inspirations that come from all sorts of different places. Like it's pretty undeniable that folks like Tolkien, or even Edgar Allan Poe or Steinbeck and Shakespeare, even one of my favorite authors, Edmund Rostand, who wrote Cyrano de Bergerac, or at least he's most famous for that. He's obviously written many more things. But the point being is that storytelling is one of the most powerful devices that we as humans enjoy learning new concepts, not only from each other, but just like with each other. We can experience these things together. Movies, books. You can say, "Hey, did you read this? It's so oh," and then when this happened, what the hell? It's so crazy. It makes you think. And all, of course, the situations are dramatic and powerful in ways that normal life really shouldn't be, right? We shouldn't have constant violence around us if we're lucky. We shouldn't have constant strife and bizarre, things going on. And to kind of get back to my series and kind of what specifically is going on is I wanted to craft a world of dragons and essentially dragons alone. Now, there are other species and, creatures and whatnot in my stories, but I wanted all of the primary characters, both heroes and villains, to be dragons, and that way, um, it's sort of at least I don't want to say it's necessarily original in its sense, but it's not common to have these kinds of stories, right? Normally, we would see things like Lord of the Rings, or just other stories where humans are the primary heroes and villains, and there is a dragon or two or three or whatnot, even in a Game of Thrones, right? And that's not necessarily bad or anything. It's just, well, what could set the tone and make it different? I'm like, well, this is something I would like to do. And at the same time, all of the characters are relatable in one way or another when we consider something called the kind of atypical, or not atypical, excuse me, the typical hero's journey. Um, Sort of in the teachings of Joseph Campbell. For those who are or are not familiar with Joseph Campbell, he wrote a book called The Hero's Journey, and then also Hero with a Thousand Faces. And he's most well known for his teachings at universities regarding this kind of foundational storytelling basics that must be present, that really contribute to making a story kind of stick and hit really hard. And to make that super clear, Star Wars follows this archetype. Lord of the Rings follows the archetype as well. Harry Potter, The Matrix, pretty much all of the most famous franchises you've ever heard of, or at least sort of series, if you will, follow that kind of archetype, and it's not by accident, right? There's a good reason to shape your storytelling in a certain way, and at the same time, it doesn't have to be identical to everything else. It's not a carbon copy, cookie cutter, kind of like, oh God, the same things again and again. It's the same but different, if that makes any sense.
It's unique. So, how do you interpret the symbolism behind the diamond dragons in the story?
Well, so symbolism is pretty huge in storytelling in general. And so, for example, for those who are familiar with the movie Blade Runner 2049, and not to be confused with the original one, in I want to say it was 1982, Ridley Scott's sort of interpretation of that movie, the original with Harrison Ford and just a Blade Runner. But when Denis Villanueva, who's super famous now for doing Dune, but
Yes.
he did Blade Runner 2049. It's a prime example of where there are thematic underpinnings, very heavy ones. There's color palettes at work. That's something that a lot of people don't really talk about. And as a storyteller with a lot of experience, I really wish that was talked about more. Color is so important. And it's not just color alone, it's the juxtaposition of those colors: black and white, red and blue, green and violet. All these kinds of things have meanings. They're not always the exact same meanings per each different author's story or filmmaker's story, but it's undeniable that, like, if you're using dark blues and violets and black, this gives you a completely different mood than like bright yellows and oranges and light greens or whatnot, right, Daniel? So
Yes.
it's like there are opportunities for storytellers and filmmakers alike to utilize these things. Now, often, if from again, this is my perspective, if an author is competent and exemplary with their work, like they're an excellent storyteller, they're going to include those things in the details of their books. And that's regardless of if they have illustrations or concept art or beautiful covers, whatever, right? If they have just nothing but words and no fancy anything, they're going to write about these things. Um, Even if they do not, if a film later gets made and people say, now we want to imagine, you know, author X's work, they'll be like, well, what color should the city be? And they're like, well, I think it should be almost all white, like whites and grays and silvers. They're like, why? Because he describes it this way in the books. That's a good idea, right? Duh. Now, if the author does not describe those things, he or she has now left it open to, kind of an interpretation. Now, it's possible that he may have guided the readers and possibly designers and developers in the right way to sort of, what's the right word for it? Divine. What do they think the colors should be? For these things. But if you don't include all those clues within your writing, it's like, well, then how do you know what it is that maybe you as the author envision your villain being all red, but then later people make a movie or something with or without your permission, whatever, and it's the devil guy is all black, and you're like, why did they do that? And it's like, because you never described him as red ever, not once. So why would we draw him in red? So I don't know if that kind of answers your question, but like, I tend to look at all of those aspects, Daniel, and that's in addition to like having underlying themes like friendship, being a super strong bond, or sacrifice, or just even the persistence through terrible circumstances, right? When everything is at the lowest point, you need some hero to say, come on, we can do this, that kind of courage
Energy.
under fire, if you will. So yeah, in addition to all those kinds of themes, there's other things at play that I feel are required of storytelling.
Which character do you find most compelling and why?
In my own series, you're asking?
Yes.
That's a tough question. I think it would be difficult for me as the author to say, oh, this one in particular is the most compelling. I think, again, everybody's different, but again, from my own perspective, and this is, you're asking about my own work, so I guess I am biased, is I tried very hard, and I feel like I would have succeeded if people actually read the whole series and they go through it. I think they would agree with me. I've made it so that every character has some level of, what's the right word for it? Something that's very interesting about them, and or like powerful, where you're like surprised by it, or you look at it and you're like, yeah, like that's what I would want to do. Or maybe if it's a villain thing, you're like, oh God, I can't believe he's doing that. What an asshole. You know what I mean? I wanted to make sure that you would have a visceral reaction. I will give one example, although I wouldn't necessarily say, like I said, that any one character is more compelling. Violetta. Violetta is a princess type of character when you first encounter her in Diamond Dragons 1. Now, she's loosely, although not directly, based off of none other than Scarlett O'Hara from the very famous Gone with the Wind series, which was originally written by, I want to say her name was Margaret Mitchell. And then, of course, in the I want to say it was the 50s, 1950s, the wonderful film, a very long film, of course, too, but it was a brilliant production, almost exemplar on every level: costuming, lighting, sound design, music, the performances. Certainly amazing stuff. But anyhow, originally when you meet Scarlett O'Hara in Gone with the Wind, she is, and forgive me, pretentious, presumptuous. She is a narcissistic little, she's the type of, not just a woman or man, the type of human being that you'd be like, oh God, please, like, do I have to deal with this person? They're terrible. They are so self-involved. They don't care about anything or anyone. But this was not by accident. It wasn't like Margaret Mitchell was like, here I am writing a character that's going to be so, everybody's going to love her. She's so awesome. She knew the goal was, I kind of want the audience to not like her. She has to have these devilish, ugly underpinnings, even though the character was physically beautiful and adorned with a beautiful dress and great riches and wealth. And oh, I tell you what to do. You are my slave, and you will do as I say. You're just the hired help. And she wanted people to be like, oh God, what a presumptuous little, you know. However, as you can quite imagine, and this again goes for whether people have or have not either A, seen the film, or B, read the book, um, the character goes through changes, right? She has to adapt later. And that's what makes things compelling. It's not that you like her and feel like she's the the best character in the world. You know what I mean? She's not, by design. But what's most interesting, Daniel, and again, this is my perspective, but I feel that it is really almost goes without saying, and it is important to say though, is the best characters adapt. They change. They start out one way and then they become a different way. Another example, not from, of course, my own work here, Frodo. Frodo starts off as a simple farm boy in a certain way. Excuse me, a farm hobbit, Frodo Baggins, and he's happy-go-lucky. Everything's great. He's never been in any severe danger. And if we then compare that to the end at Return of the King, this is a different character now, right? I mean, it's undeniable, and this isn't going just off of Peter Jackson's wonderful films with New Line Cinema and whatnot. I'm talking about with the books that Frodo went through such dramatic change and arc. It's undeniable. These are all in Tolkien's words, and the battle was very psychological, surely physical, without a doubt, but more so, at least again from my perspective as an author and creator of 30 plus years, his battle was far more psychological. And that is what I feel is way more important, and it sticks way harder in our hearts and souls than just the typical, I am a tough guy, I'm gonna kill you, haha, I win, now I get the girl, and great. And I'm making fun of Arnold, but you know what I mean. Like, there are some movies and films and stories where it's fine. The hero starts out fairly strong. They will have to, have some challenges, but they start off strong and they come out on top. So not that much, as they pretty much stay the same character. And by the way, that is good in some stories, but not for the hero's journey type of stories, not for Luke Skywalker, not for Harry Potter, not for Neo from the Matrix, of course, and so on. Right? I'm sure that makes sense to you, but I don't know how many people actually reflect and think about it and go like, "I'll be damned! You know what? That guy's right."
Very well said, Mr. Matthew. Very well said.
Thank
So,
you. More applause. What is going on?
So,
Oh,
how did you enhance your writing style throughout the Diamond Dragon series?
I'm sorry. Say that again. I couldn't quite hear you.
How did you enhance your writing style throughout Diamond
How would I
Dragons?
describe my style?
Enhance.
Um, I'm not really sure how I would answer that. I suppose it would be best to say for people if they want to find out more, they should visit the website. You can read the first, I want to say it's the first 9 chapters of book one is what I've set up on a PDF on my website, which is it's totally for free. So that way, there's really no question if people are like, well, I don't know if I want to buy a book when maybe it's too expensive or I don't know and I'm not sure. And I'm like, you can read the first 9 chapters. If you don't like it, don't buy it. I don't want you to read something that you're not enjoying, something that you're not getting involved in. If you don't like the characters for, I mean, whatever reason, it's none of my business. I'm not here to judge people whether they do or do not. um, but yeah, for me though, it's been one of those things where, because of my experience in acting and directing and sound design, and even to set another tone, is a lot of my background is also in saber fencing and martial arts. So I used to compete, as a martial artist. So like it's no friggin' joke, like a lot of the work that I did was very physical and demanding and uh, required a certain amount of spirit. But anyway, going back to like acting and whatnot, I was very determined to set up something that not only I would like to read and enjoy, but that if I was an actor from the outside looking at one or more of the characters, that I'd be like, I would love to do that role. What a beautiful role, even if it's a villain, even if it's a narcissistic character who then, changes over time and whatnot. And by the way, really quick, just because it was recently on my mind and I was watching a video about it. Um, what a huge shout out to the actor. I wish I knew his name off the top of my head, and I do not. Who portrayed Homelander in? I think it's called The Boys. I haven't really seen any
Yes,
of
the
it,
boys.
but I heard about it and caught little details. And that Homelander, the character, is a very narcissistic superhero, and I was like, wow, what an interesting, right, what an interesting idea. And so I watched a video about the actor who was portraying him and how, specific choices are made, and it was super interesting. I highly recommend it to anybody. Go look up like video on analyzing, I don't know the actor's name off the top of my head, sorry, Homelander's narcissistic personality and how it applies to the boys. What a fantastic role, despite the fact that he's kind of an asshole. You know what I mean? Like that's kind of the thing about it. It's why people like Breaking Bad. Like there's no doubt about it that Walter White as a character is a psychopath. He's a destructive human being, but he didn't start that way. And that's also what made that interesting about it. We start with this sort of humble and sort of meek and almost being pounded down, father who has cancer and all these things. And then he turns into a supervillain. What the hell is going on? Vince Gilligan, whatever possessed you, but I mean, what a it's this is how great storytelling is done. So
Yes.
for example, Daniel, I'll just at least summarize with this with it is my primary villain, his name is Nitrozite, right? And he's like a ghost and bone dragon. You could imagine him as sort of a mixture between like Megatron and Skeletor and
Oh,
Darth
wow.
Vader, whatever. But he is a horrible. His mind is obviously Lazako. He's a terrible force. In the book, but it's great to write him intelligent and destructive. You know what I mean? Um, because again, that's what makes a great character. Real quick, Die Hard, right? Uh, R.I.P. to Alan Rickman. We still miss him, but what a fantastic villain Hans Gruber was for Bruce Willis, who also ailing health. So again, shout outs to Bruce Willis. We love the guy, but right, like I'm not saying who else could have played Hans Gruber. Sure, there was probably other actors, but it's like you put Alan Rickman in this position, you immediately see this exemplary performance from him, and it's all calculated and very intelligent. Even though he makes dumb mistakes, but his voice and his presence. is undeniable. The way that he speaks, and he doesn't sound like some blowhard jackass. He sounds like he's a calculating, cold, um, devious, monster, and it works beautifully. So anyway, I know I'm kind of, again, talking about a lot of different points here, but, like, for me, this is what makes storytelling interesting, Daniel. Like,
Yes.
you want to have compelling concepts, characters, their arcs, color palettes, of course, action scenes. As you can imagine, there's plenty of places where the dragons are flying around, strafing each other, shooting fire and lightning and ice, and people are going to be like, "Holy, what the?" Like, try to comprehend this. Like, there's so many elements flying around. You'd be like, "Oh, what the hell is going on?" Like, I can't even keep track of it. It's like, yeah, in some cases we want that, and in other cases there's like a one-on-one duel, where the focus is, you're like, oh no, it's just him and him, and you're like, yep, one is going to come out on top, and it. Who's it going to be? I don't know. you know
So, Mr. Matthew, what would be your advice for those aspiring writers out there?
Advice. This is a vague, kind of way to look at it too, because advice is cheap, I would say. Good advice is still relatively cheap, I should say. Great advice has to be specific from my perspective. For example, I will at least start with this. For me, I say identify your goals. And I don't necessarily mean that we need to talk about it in the sense of, I want to make money. I'm like, that's even still, that's too vague, but I wouldn't recommend that if you're an author. I'm talking about identify your goals, like, okay, what the hell is this story about? Like, at the end of the day, if anybody ever does open your book and read from cover to cover, close the book, set it down, and they go, huh, what do you want them to feel? What do you want them to see or have seen? What do you want them to be able to communicate about the book in a mouthful or two, or a pair, whatever, you know what I mean? Like, if someone said, what's Die Hard about? What's the first Star Wars movie about? And the second one, whatever. What did you want them to get out of it? This is somewhat complicated, but you have to be pretty specific. And then we could echo that same thought process into, how are you going to finish your book? When are you going to finish your book? Are you going to take a year? And if a year, how many days per a week or a month or whatever are you going to work? I'm not trying to make it into a thing like, you better work every single day or you're an idiot. That's kind of bad. No, I wouldn't tell people you must work 365 days a year. I'm like, okay, calm down. It's like, you don't need that. However, right, if on the opposite end, if someone's like, oh, I don't really feel like writing, I maybe write once a month. I'm like, so if you did math once a month for 5 years, how good do you think you'd be at math? Hmm? Must give us pause. Same thing with a video game, even to make it into another facet where people be like, oh, that does make sense. Or for me as a fencer back in the day, when I had anybody who would come in once a month to fence, and then they were later complaining that they weren't a very good fencer, and I'm like, well, yeah, you do suck at it, and I'm not trying to be a jerk about it. I'm saying you should expect that, because you're in here once a month. Let's say a year passed, you come in 12 times. This person, they come in 5 times a week. Do the math. It's just, it would be impossible for you to be better than that person, with only, unless you were like, well, I studied for 20 years and now I'm only just, okay, that's different. I'm saying if both of you start on the exact same day, had no experience in fencing, football, soccer, whatever, if Daniel's doing 1 day a week and I'm doing five, there's no contest, unless I'm a complete idiot. And I mean, let's be honest, as an average human being, most of us aren't geniuses, and most of us aren't like, whatever, I don't know, I just eat cookies all day. I mean, come on, like, come on average, Daniel is as intelligent as Matthew, and so on. Now, sure, maybe someone will say, oh, but I think one person is more. I'm like, sure, but it isn't like, I am 12 times more intelligent than everyone. That's pretty rare. I mean, come on. So my point being is though, it's really more about an investment of your hours and consist. So I would often say discipline, consistency,
Yes.
right? Deadlines. When are you going to get it done? Creativity, for sure. Reflection, repeat. Those six things: discipline, consistency, deadlines, creativity, reflection, repeat. And for anybody who's like, that's too much, I can't handle it, I'm like, then you probably shouldn't be approaching any complicated project that's bigger than going to take you 10 minutes, going to take you an hour. If you're talking about writing a book, it's gonna take significantly longer than an hour. Right? Like, I mean, it's not even questionable. Even if someone said, I busted out a book in a month, I'd be like, really? I mean, what's the quality of that though? Really? Like, okay, you know. And on that note, I will just quickly say, for me, I release on the solstices. And for if people are like, wait, the word solstice goes in and out of my ear, right? It's just every 6 months. And the solstices are, of course, the alignments of the moons and our planet and all these kinds of things, the sun, etc. And it's just June and December, and I find that basically over that period of year, I can release the digital version halfway through, and then at the end of the year, I'm like, I've got every single illustration. I've, proverbially crossed every T and dotted every I and done all the little stupid details of like, oh, I missed a period there. How did that happen? Or whatever. Or be like, oh, look at the alignment on this sentence. What the hell happened here? Fix that. Like this stupid stuff. I just want to make sure everything is pristine as best I can. You can never get it 100% perfect. And I wouldn't even want to go for it because there's no return on investment of trying to like micromanage down to beyond 99.99999% perfect. You're just like, just whatever, not unless you're selling literally a million books a month or something. But I mean, it's important for me to like do it right, develop things well, make sure that all the lines that the characters say are like that's the best version of what they would respond to that character with. I could have them say many things. This, what about the oh, they should say this. That's so good. They should quote that other character who sacrificed themselves to save them and throw it right back in their face. Yes, that's what they should say, right? Like, you have choices. So when you're working on your book, you might think right away your first choices are the best ones. But if you review and reflect and go back a couple times, you might be like, oh, wait, there's an opportunity here. This is a great line. This is fine, but it could be better if I change it to this. And this could be anything. It could be having a scene between Matthew and Daniel in a bar, and you're like, yeah, that's a good place for them to discuss the thing about Sophia and the diamonds or whatever. But wait, no, they need to do it in this location, and they pull up in each other their own cars because they don't trust each other. And one's got a gun like right under the jacket, rammed up against their door in a small hole that the other doesn't even know, and he's ready to blast them. Blah blah. You see what I'm saying, right? That like it doesn't necessarily mean that setting a scene in one place is bad and wrong, nor does it mean that the other one is absolutely 100% right. It just means sometimes you might say, ooh, this one's more powerful. I like it. Let's go with that. And actually, sometimes it's only like one step up, like only a little bit better. But, right, Daniel, if I said, hey, Daniel, you can choose to be really good at fencing or just very good at fencing. Which one do you want? And you're like, well, which one's better? I'm like, well, one's only slightly better. You're like, I'll take the slightly worse one. You're like, what? No, you wouldn't do that at all. That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. Right. So you try to do that, right, as much as possible. Sometimes you run into missed opportunities. You'll go back to your books. You'll be like, oh, I totally could have had him mention Daniel at this point. I missed that opportunity. That's okay. It's okay. I'll look for other opportunities later. But right, maybe later you'll be like, it would have been such a prime time for him to mention, hey, remember when I saved you that time? I saved your ass. Huh? Huh? Hmm? You owe me. But if you missed that opportunity, that's okay. Whatever. As long as what you were doing was pretty strong all the way through. So, anyways, that's a long way to talk about all that stuff. But that's how I feel about it. That it's a complicated process. from my perspective. Now, granted, if someone's writing a much simpler, maybe a simple comedy, and they just want a roll in the hay and it's just funny and that's all, you don't need to develop things like on a epic fantasy and epic sci-fi level. If you're not doing Interstellar, if you're not doing Ender's Game,
Ender's Game, yeah, I love it.
right? If you're not doing Lord, I keep bringing it up, but it's pretty much the gold standard for like fantasy. If you're not doing Lord of the Rings, and you're like, no, this is just a fun fan. They got axes and swords and elves, but we're just making fun of it. They're gonna run at each other, "Arr!" and he's gonna trip over a can. It's a just nobody's gonna care about the handle on the axe. Nobody's gonna ask the history of it. It's a comedy. Okay, fine, no problem, no problem. But when you're doing Lord of the Rings, you gotta again, you gotta dot every I and cross every T. I feel.
Excellent, excellent advice, Mr. Matthew. So, can you please invite our listeners to support all your books?
Yeah, if they want to find out more, the absolute best place is diamond-dragons.com. And it's a pleasure to be here. I hope your listeners learn from it. I hope you gain some fun insight on the process of storytelling. And again, that's independent of whether there are already authors out there listening or other creators. But right, the storytelling brings all those creative things together. Things like sound design, lighting, costuming, colors, and concept art. They all sort of coalesce into that one project, which is again storytelling.
Yes, people, let's support Matthew Carudo because if you support him, more fantasy books to come. So, Mr. Matthew, thank you for your time.
My pleasure, Daniel. Thanks for having me.
More to come, people. See you soon. So, Mr. Matthew, I'm inviting you next year again. I want to talk all